In the process of getting better at something, there are 3 important steps. First you learn, then you do, and the third step often gets overlooked. You reflect on what you've done. Do a critical analysis of what went right and what went wrong. I've never shied away from honest feedback, even if it's harsh. There was this comment a while back on my smear frames video, "Remove the jelly thing, bro." And yeah, that's not the most well thought out feedback, but it was a sign that there was something about this video that the viewer didn't like. So I followed them up, asking for more detail, and thankfully they provided it. And the gist was, the look of my blob didn't fit with the rest of the video, which, fair enough. I may not fully agree, but there was a nugget of truth in there. I can't just slap my blob into something and expect it to work. It needs to be better integrated. So when it came to making my issues with One Piece live action video, I tried to match the color palette and the visuals of my blob with the Mary. Don't make the blob stand out too much, make it exist more cohesively with the rest of the background. And I think it worked, at least a little. The reason I tell that story is to illustrate that, without critically looking at what you've done in the past, you'll struggle to improve in the future. Sure, you may get better at doing something if you do it 1,000 times, but I don't want to get better at doing something wrong. I want each iteration to be better than the last. That is to say, I don't want to just copy-paste my East Blue adventure for the Alabasta saga. I want it to feel different, to feel more polished, to improve, if only a little. Normally I request comments at the end of a video, but this time I'll do it at the start, even before I give my own feedback. If you found something that could be improved, even if I mention it in this video, put it in the comments. Put it in my Discord. Sure, it'd be great if it were worded thoughtfully, but even if it's a, "Bro, your water animations suck," it tells me what I need to know. Mainly that I should try to stop animating water, because animating water is awful. Alright, now onto the self-reflection. What I perceive as my shortcomings for the first series come down mainly to 2 things. A lack of consistency, and the underlying cause, a short turnaround on videos. I was really flying by the seat of my pants, taking every video on a fortnightly basis. Very rarely did I have time to really plan ahead. What I think was my best part, Nami's Burden, though it is ironically one of the least viewed parts, was an exception to that. I knew how I wanted to end that part, and I had a really strong theme in mind for it. I recorded my version of Overtaken a couple of weeks in advance, and making that part felt good. In contrast, the part before it, Sanji's part, was one of the most difficult. It was the longest script to write, and while I went into it knowing that it was going to focus on the Sanji, Luffy, Gin trifecta, I didn't have a firm image in my mind of how it was all going to fit together. Some parts are focused, they have a theme or a concept in mind and can coalesce around that theme. Then other parts, I take the chapters in pretty much chronological order. The first 2 parts, written at the same time, originally as a single part, are much shorter than the rest of the series because I was more focused on specific items rather than retelling the chapters that they covered, while something like Rogue Town followed the story in an explicitly chronological way. I think, in the end, mixtures of the 2, like Nami's Burden or The Tale of Two Liars, are probably the strongest writing-wise. My script writing certainly is inconsistent, and I want to resolve that issue with Alabasta. It may be too ambitious to say that I'll have all the scripts done before I start producing them, but I do want to have at least the broad strokes and general vibe of how I'm covering the Alabasta saga down before I start production. The inconsistency is also present in my visuals. My original background only lasted about 15 seconds, so I'd have to frequently cut to a black screen with panels or text or something else so I could reset it. It didn't loop either. There are several instances of me artificially slowing it down in editing so it could last even a couple of seconds longer. The cloudy blobby bee was actually always present in the background, but it didn't last long enough to actually make an appearance. This switched when I spent some time, I think this was the first break after the first 4 parts were released, to redo the entire background. First I made the entire thing a loop, and I also added the day-night cycle. I also added overlays to my Blob and Mary design so that they would blend. This loop was over 15 minutes long, so it had much more longevity. It was because I made this that I was able to start doing the chapter reviews. Then the Mary Blob design went through some iterations. Over the course of the series, I added different expressions as I required. However, due to a savings error, I did lose my original shadow. This meant that some of the expressions have different shading than the others. Then there was the whole issue of me accidentally exporting an expression that had a big old line through the blob, which was just me not catching it somehow. It's bizarre how blind you get to something when you work on it too much. Then even the layering changed. The first few parts had the basic background and the Mary, and then things were chopped and changed accordingly. Then when the giant looping background became present, there was a dedicated background layer, Mary and Blob layer, and then a shading layer, then a singular layer behind Mary and Blob for certain panels, and then the other panels went on top. Then in later parts, I realized I wanted more flexibility behind Mary and Blob, so I expanded that gap to 4 layers to put things. By the end of the series, my editing timeline sometimes used up to 15 layers, which is fine, but it does show that once again there was a lack of consistency. And things like end cards and all that stuff too. My honey told me that I should add them in, so I eventually did, but it should have probably been there from the start. And if you want the star of lack of consistency, look no further than the animation. My blob character design is the following. Green, circular-ish blob with this growthing that roughly looks like a bee. Originally the eyes were dark voids with some light speckles, though I've been transitioning to slightly more expressive eyes. When wearing the straw hat, I hide the bee, reasoning that it's hidden beneath the hat. Meanwhile, in the animation, it appears and disappears at will. The hat appears and disappears. Mary's face, well, that changes too, though I'm just going to say that matches the aesthetic of early One Piece. A big reason for this was that I started animating the finale animation back in April. Yes, that long ago. Squeezing in time to animate a shot whenever I could, which, between all the different parts, was not that often. The bee was dropped predominantly for ease of animating. It's much easier animating a circular blob without the bee attached, but still going forward, assuming that I continue to try to make the occasional animation, which I definitely plan to, I want to keep it more consistent. So yes, consistency in writing, consistency in visuals, and on top of that, improvements of visuals. Like I said, I want it to feel different from the East Blue Saga. So the list of things I have to do is 1. Updating the looping background elements. I reckon I'll throw in an island with different weather every now and again, maybe change the cloud formations, just something where at a glance you can tell the difference between the two. Number 2. Updating and making the Mary and Blobbit element more consistent, making the shadows consistent, adding more expressions, maybe a couple of neutral expressions. I've also realized I've limited the range of emotions I can express when only showing half a face. I can't wink, for example, so I might need to do something to address that too. Potentially changing the angle so both eyes are visible at once. 3. Creating a new intro to use for the series. I want to keep up the theme of putting my own spin on the ad break cards and use the one from the Alabasta saga. However, when I checked, the bulk of the Alabasta saga actually used the same break card as the East Blue. 4. Thumbnails. Originally, I just put the part number, then with Gaimon onwards, I put something in the sky, though I don't think it was particularly visible. For Alabasta, I want to have different thumbnails for each part, with something that unifies them so you can tell that they're all part of the same series. I've actually gotten started on some of the assets after writing a bulk of this script, and because clearly I want to make more work for myself, I've decided to completely redraw the background. It's only in its early stages and it's overly crowded at the moment, since during the animating process I'll be separating out the individual elements and spreading them out a little more, but here's the general idea on screen. As you can see, I'm showing both eyes for both Blob and Mary. I've also made them considerably smaller so they don't take up as much screen real estate. Also, to once more plug the Discord, I posted this several weeks ago there. Something a bit more ambitious I want to attempt is upgrading my editing. To put it bluntly, I think my edits are fairly boring. Lots of crossfades, some hard cuts in time to the audio, slow zooms and movements, nothing that'll blow anyone away. I want to make things more visually interesting, but I've got a couple of restraints. The updates to the edits can't be something that takes a lot of time, and if they do take some time, it should only take time the first time that they're used, which means I need to be able to, essentially, copy-paste an edit that I've done into future videos, or in short, edit reusability. It may honestly be the case that I rethink my editing software. DaVinci Resolve is very good for a free product, and its fusion effects give you a lot of flexibility, but it isn't fast. I've gotten faster the more I've used it, but to do certain things it takes precious minutes. That being said, it could just be the case that I'm not using DaVinci Resolve as efficiently as I could, so another place to upskill. I've also been using version 17 this whole time when version 19 is available. All that being said, now that I'm transitioning items to my new Linux machine, on which I've already installed DaVinci, my options may be even more limited. I haven't actually tried DaVinci on Linux yet to test the functionality, but I'm assuming it'll be mostly the same. I just need to find a way to copy-paste additions to elements onto other elements. That'd speed things up considerably. Instead of having to individually add each crossfade to each clip, if I could Control-C, Control-V the one that I wanted onto multiple clips at once, or even select and modify multiple crossfades at once, that would save me oodles of time, just as an example, and that's just a simple edit. I also want to update my music. I've been pretty happy with my output, aside from that terrible rendition of Hope, but at the same time I'm beginning to reach the limits of what my built-in drum loops and sounds can accomplish. I've got a couple of choices. Expand beyond the built-in sounds that my keyboard has, which haven't actually been updated for literal decades. This thing is almost as old as I am, and actually run it through some sort of MIDI program and increase the range and flexibility of sounds I can make. Or I could get more experimental with my arrangements. I clearly have a space of arrangements that I'm comfortable with. A bit groovy, a bit funky, a bit jazzy. Something that slides into the background. What if I try something a bit more experimental? Or potentially go in the opposite direction, drop the electronic keyboard, the drum sounds, and just go all in on piano arrangements. Or maybe both. Number 3, expand the range of instruments. If music was a game, I'm a piano main. However, I can also play bassoon, and I have a basic knowledge, and I mean basic knowledge, of guitar and bass, and more importantly, I have access to them. I can also play a bit of cajon. I actually would love to add bassoon to the tracks. It features pretty nicely in a lot of the One Piece OST, but the main problem is, how on earth do I mic it up? If I go the guitar and bass route, I'll need to get better at them, and I don't actually have access to a cajon anymore. I'm not committing to a single path just yet, but it is something that I'm actively thinking about. The last thing that's been on my mind is my narration. I feel like at times it can be a little monotonous. For some people, that's good. I've apparently got a pretty nice voice, and people can find listening to it pleasant. On the other hand, I feel like it's not particularly engaging to listen to when everything is said in the same calm manner. Though I don't really want to talk in an exaggerated way that makes it feel unnatural. Do some uptones at the end of sentences instead of downtones. Put on a more stereotypical influencer voice. That felt gross. It may also just be a problem unique to me having to listen to my own voice for hours at a time each day while editing. Funnily enough, I think the solution may be able to be gleaned from my chapter reactions. The long pauses and ums aside, when I'm naturally reacting, I have a, unsurprisingly, more natural range of vocals. I should try and consciously learn to do what I do unconsciously to add a bit more color to my narrator voice. All this being said, I have given myself a deadline, and deadlines are extremely important when making something. The first part of right now I'm going with the Grandeur of Alabasta, but I'm not 100% committed to it just yet. It will be released on the 23rd of February, barring something extreme happening, which, touch wood, won't. If you're interested in making something yourself, there's nothing I'd recommend more than a deadline. Make it realistic, but not so far-flung in the future that you may as well not have one at all. A deadline makes sure you complete the thing you're working on, and completion, especially when you're in your early stages, is infinitely more important than perfection. I'm writing this the weekend before release, so I may have already restarted streaming on Twitch by the time this video comes out. The computer is 95% set up and ready to go, so I've pretty much already completed Checkpoint 1 and gotten started on Checkpoint 2 content. Please, 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 leave some feedback on the Point of East Blue series, whether it be on the comments or via Discord, because I'm not kidding when I say it's not I attempt new things, it's we attempt new things. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a fruitful day.